My name is Ruby Lawson, and I was born and raised in a small town called Prescott, Oregon. For most people around me, success was measured by one thing: a college diploma hanging on the wall. In my household, there was no room for vague dreams, only one clear path: graduate with honors, get into a prestigious university, and land one of the respectable careers: law, medicine, or academia. That was the standard. My father, Douglas, was a veteran political science lecturer at Oregon State University. He stood tall, always dressed sharply, and spoke as if he were constantly addressing a classroom. My mother, Linda, was the principal of the town's only high school. To her, the key to life was discipline and tradition. If you followed the rules, you'd succeed. My sister, Natalie Lawson, was the perfect child in their eyes. She could recite the Declaration of Independence at age 4 and was accepted into Harvard Medical School by the time she was 18. When she announced her full-ride scholarship, the whole family threw a party. Relatives came from all parts, and my father raised his glass, eyes gleaming with pride, declaring, "This is the future of America." For my parents, Natalie was the embodiment of success. For me, well, I was the one who didn't fit the mold. They didn't see me the way they saw her. I didn't hate studying, but from a young age, I was far more interested in what happened behind the screen than in copying theorems into a notebook. At 12, I fixed a neighbor's jammed printer for $10 and 2 movie tickets. By 15, I had written my first lines of code to build a website for Miss Martin's flower shop. She got her first online order just 3 days later. I was so proud of that. I thought my parents would be too. Instead, my mother frowned and told me, "You should focus on the SAT. These little hobbies won't get you into Columbia." My father was more blunt. He stared at the laptop I was setting up for a client and said coldly, "If you want to be a lifetime tech support girl, keep it up, but don't expect a single dime from us." That comment stung. The one thing I was never given in that house was the right to be different. At every meal, my sister's name was repeated like a sacred chant. Natalie was chosen to present at the Boston Symposium. Or, Professor Landon says she has natural leadership potential. And me, I was asked, "Ruby, are you retaking the math section of the SAT for a 3rd time?" In May of my senior year, the family sat around the dinner table, surrounded by college application packets. My father had carefully arranged them: Stanford, Princeton, Yale. None of it meant anything to me. I was filled with anxiety, but I knew I had to say it. I had been holding it in for months. "I'm not applying to college," I said. "I want to start my own business. I already have a plan. I have my first client, and I've saved nearly $4 from designing websites." The sound of a fork clattering onto the plate filled the silence. My mother went completely still, and my father slowly stood up. His voice sliced through the air like a razor blade. "That's not happening. Not under this roof." It wasn't concern that I saw in his eyes, it was disgust. I didn't cry. I just stood up, walked to my room, and started packing. A week later, I left home with nothing but 3 suitcases, an old laptop, and my determination. No one saw me off. No one wished me good luck. They were sure I'd come crawling back, ashamed and begging for forgiveness. My first apartment was on the 3rd floor of a crumbling building in the suburbs of Portland. It was barely 450 square feet, with creaky wooden floors and windows that never fully shut. The draft came in no matter how tightly I shut them, but for the first time, it felt like my space, my own. The kitchen was so narrow that I could touch both walls with my arms outstretched. I set up a second-hand wooden table under the only outlet in the living room and turned it into my makeshift office. Every morning, I brewed coffee with a faded drip machine, then got to work before the sun came up. And I didn't stop until the streetlights outside flickered on. There was no salary, no family expectations, just me and a simple idea: help local artisans sell their products online. I called it Rustic Cart. It wasn't groundbreaking, nor was it backed by cutting-edge tech, but I believed in it. Oregon was full of talented people making pottery, candles, hand-woven baskets, but most of them had no idea how to sell their work online. I built simple websites and took a 5% commission from every successful sale. The rest, it belonged entirely to the seller. In those early weeks, I coded by day and sent cold emails by night to small craft stores. Most of them never replied. Some asked, "What college are you attending?" When I told them I hadn't been to college, they fell silent. One even sent me a laughing emoji and said, "Good luck with that." My bank account emptied faster than I expected. I lived on cup noodles, boiled eggs, and canned beans every night. I cranked the heater full blast, not just to chase away the cold, but to push back the creeping fear that had started to take over every corner of my mind. One night, I called my mother just to hear her voice, but when I told her I hadn't gone back to school, she immediately responded, "Then don't expect anyone to be waiting for you." I thought I had grown used to the coldness, but after that call, I sat on the floor of my apartment in silence for nearly an hour, wondering if I had made the wrong choice. 3 months after launching Rustic Cart, I had exactly 2 clients. One was Josie, a soap maker. The other was Walter, an elderly woodworker who lived a 40-minute drive away. Walter called me computer girl and often got my name wrong. He thought it was Lucy, but he still paid me $20 a month to manage his orders. Thanks to them, I was able to cover my first month's electric bill without borrowing from a credit card. But I was beginning to wonder if I had made the right decision. My car was breaking down. My bank account was almost empty, and I was living off a few small clients. Then, one morning in February, while dropping off a shipment for Josie, I was rear-ended at the intersection of 15th and Broadway. My old Civic wouldn't start again. The repair estimate was nearly $800, which I didn't have. As I sat in the middle of my apartment, surrounded by unpaid invoices and packaging tape, I wondered if I had made the wrong choice. Maybe it wasn't too late to go back to school. Maybe this whole idea of starting a business was a mistake. But instead of letting that fear stop me, I decided to attend a small business meetup at the downtown library, an event I had scrolled past on a community site many times before. I didn't know what I was looking for, maybe just the comfort of being in a room with other people who were trying as hard as I was. That's when I met Marcia Bennett. Marcia Bennett was a woman in her 50s with neatly tied silver hair, simple clothes, and piercing eyes. She was the founder of Ledgerflow, a small business accounting software company, and she was giving a talk about scaling products for small businesses. After the Q&A ended, I waited until the room cleared, then nervously walked up to her and handed her my homemade business card. I nearly dropped it in the process, my hands shaking with uncertainty. "I'm Ruby," I said, my voice slightly cracking. "I run a small platform helping artisans sell online. No degrees, no funding, but I have real clients and real revenue, even if it's small." Marcia looked at me quietly for a few moments before she smiled and extended her hand. "Do you have customer data?" she asked. I nodded, opening my laptop to show her the orders and growth charts, modest but clear. She scanned a few spreadsheets, her eyes flicking back and forth as she processed the information. After a few moments, she said, "You don't need more individual sellers. You need B2B clients." I was puzzled. "What do you mean?" I asked, instead of focusing on selling individual pieces like one bar of soap at a time. She explained, "Why not sell your order management software to 50 craft stores? It's the same goal, helping them, but on a larger scale. You already have the model. Now it's time to restructure." I was stunned. In that moment, it felt like someone had handed me the missing puzzle piece. We talked until nearly 10 p.m. Even though my leg ached from the crash earlier that morning, I felt light. A door had opened, and I knew I was ready to walk through it. The next day, I immediately went to work. I renamed the company to CraftLogic Solutions, and the old name Rustic Cart felt too naive now. It no longer fit the direction we were headed. Under Marcia's mentorship, I pivoted the business from a consumer-facing platform for individual sellers to a B2B solution-building supply chain management software specifically for small to mid-sized artisan businesses, a market that no one had really tapped into properly yet. The first month after the pivot was brutal. I averaged just 3 hours of sleep a night. I rewrote the entire system using a new framework, launching an email campaign targeting independent retail stores across the West Coast. Every new contract helped pay off my car repair debt, cover hosting expenses, and eventually hire a part-time intern named Jared, a UX design student I met at a local meetup. We worked out of my apartment, using boxes of instant noodles as makeshift desks, and hung a whiteboard on the fridge door to track our progress. It was scrappy, but in that space, CraftLogic began to take form. By the fall, I had made over 100 cold calls without success. I was on the verge of giving up when, one morning, I received an email from the operations department of Maple and Sage. a handcrafted furniture chain with 36 locations across 6 states. They had been using outdated management software from the early 2000s and were looking for a new solution. The email simply said, "Here, your software can track inventory per location. Send us a demo." I stared at that email for a long time, rereading it again and again. After 5 sleepless days, Jared and I built a live demo. We simulated multi-location inventory and order management with a clean dashboard, easy navigation, and intelligent alert systems. When Rebecca Tran, the operations manager, called back, there was no hesitation. "We need this system deployed within 60 days. Can you deliver?" I glanced at Jared, who gave me a thumbs up. My heart raced as I replied, "Yes, but I'll need to meet with your tech team to integrate accounting and shipping APIs. Where's your office?" Rebecca paused. "We're remote at the moment, but I can fly to your headquarters in Denver whenever you need." That was my first meeting in a real office, complete with clean carpets and an automatic coffee machine. I wore a borrowed blazer and slightly worn shoes, but I stood tall, answering every technical question with the confidence that had been forged in long nights coding on a beat-up laptop. The final contract was signed for $420. Now with $150, Azure paid upfront to begin implementation. I didn't cry. I just sat motionless in the taxi back to my hotel, staring out the window, clutching my backpack like it held an entirely new chapter of my life. From that moment, everything changed. After delivering on our first project, Maple and Sage referred us to 3 more chains, one of which was Kraft, a large craft materials supermarket chain based in California. They signed a full system deployment contract for $630. More. I officially incorporated the company in Oregon, rented our first office in Beaverton, and hired 5 full-time employee software engineers, a project manager, and an in-house accountant. Within 2 years, Craft Logic had expanded to offices in Portland, Denver, and San Diego. We served over 60 retail chains, and the platform had evolved into a full ecosystem that handled everything from order management and inventory tracking to shipping integration and customer behavior analytics. In our 3rd year, revenue surpassed $1, saved $2 million, with net profits clearing $300. By year 4, I was invited to speak at the Women in Tech West Coast Conference, where I shared how simple software tools could transform traditional industries. After my speech, a middle-aged man approached me and handed me his business card with both hands. "I'm Michael Davis, Chief Strategy Officer at Bright Access Ventures. We've been following Craft Logic since earlier this year. If you're open to an M&A conversation, we have a proposal." I smiled and accepted his card, but I made no promises. The following week, I received 3 more acquisition offers. The highest one valued the company at $36 million, an amount that stunned our entire team. Jared blurted out, "If you sell, I'd be happy for you, but please don't. We're not finished." I looked up at the development roadmap pinned to our meeting room wall, where we tracked feature modules with colorful sticky notes. I knew exactly where we were and where we were headed. I declined all 3 offers not because the money wasn't enough, but because Craft Logic wasn't just a company, it was proof of the path I had chosen, a path my family had once completely rejected. Selling it now would have felt like sitting back at that old dinner table, silent under their judgmental eyes, nodding in defeat. Even as the company thrived, I maintained an almost extreme level of discretion in my personal life. I still drove my old Subaru, lived in a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Beaverton, and whenever anyone asked about my work, I simply said, "I build small software tools for craft shops." My family, predictably, only seemed to remember me when discussing disappointment. My mom still called once a month not to check in, but to update me on how Natalie had just been appointed chief resident at a major hospital in Seattle, or how her husband had published another biochemistry paper in a science journal. I learned to smile and stay silent. But everything changed when my father, Douglas, was laid off after 28 years of teaching political science at Oregon State University. Budget cuts had eliminated his department, and at 61, he lost his main source of income. 1 week after my father lost his job, my mother was diagnosed with an autoimmune thyroid disorder. The treatment would be long-term, and the medication wasn't covered by insurance. The news was a gut punch, and I felt the weight of it all. When Natalie heard about it, her response was flat and distant. "I'm swamped at the hospital too. I can't help. That was it. There was no offer to help, no questions about how they could manage. It felt like my family was slipping farther away from me, even as they silently expected me to be the one to help. I sat in my office that day, staring at a bank statement my mother accidentally sent to an old email address I still had access to. One line stood out. This month's mortgage payment overdue by 16 days. Just below that, a prescription bill for nearly $1, a $10. No one in my family had reached out for help. Maybe they still believed I was struggling, barely scraping by, too stubborn to go back to school. But I knew the truth. If I didn't step in, they would lose their home. That evening, I contacted my attorney, Robert Caney, the same one who helped structure CraftLogic's investment contracts. I asked him to set up a trust fund under a different name, one that appeared as a support grant from a nonprofit education community initiative. Within a week, Spring Hill began sending monthly payments to cover their mortgage. My parents received a confirmation letter from the bank, stating that an organization had volunteered to back their loan due to their long-standing contributions to local education. They didn't ask any questions. They just accepted it. At the same time, I had Robert set up a shell company, Brightstone Consulting, registered in Boise. Through that company, I signed a fake contract with my father, hiring him to write a civic education curriculum. The compensation? $2 a month. No one checked it. No one questioned it. My father started bragging to his friends about being appointed as a state-level educational advisor. My mother, relieved, assumed that some anonymous benefactor was helping them through this rough patch. And me. I quietly approved the wire transfers each month, never asking for gratitude, never expecting thanks. But that wasn't all. Last June, I found out that Natalie had just given birth to twins. Due to unexpected costs from her C-section, she had to postpone enrolling them in the bilingual daycare she had raved about for years. A few weeks later, 2 scholarships appeared in the daycare's records. They were labeled the Northwest Infant Potential Development Fund, each worth $9. $500 per year for exactly 2 names, Jacob and Lily Winters. Natalie posted on Facebook in all caps, "It's a miracle. God always provides in his own way." I read it and smiled dryly. Over the past 3 years, I had spent more than $120,000 maintaining every form of support housing, medication, tuition, and my father's nominal income. All of it was legal. All of it was carefully masked to keep my identity hidden. But I wasn't done. Not yet. At work, I was Ruby Lawson, the CEO of CraftLogic Solutions. TechBridge Weekly had dubbed me the tech sorceress of the artisan sector. I closed million-dollar contracts, spoke at conferences, and flew private when needed. But to my family, I was still the dropout daughter, the one who was probably selling things online somewhere. Every Christmas, I came home in a basic rental car, wearing an old coat. My mom would ask, "Still haven't reconsidered going back to college?" My dad would nod slowly, as if silently forgiving me for not having made something of myself. I learned to smile and stay silent. Then came Thanksgiving. The day was gloomy and rainy in the suburbs of Salem. I showed up at my parents' house with a bottle of Napa Valley red wine, a nearly 40-page color print folder, and a USB drive containing the internal presentation I had delivered at the Seattle Tech Conference a few months earlier. I had waited long enough for this moment. When I walked into the house, my mother, Linda, was plating the stuffing onto ceramic dishes, the same way she had done every year. My father, Douglas, was sitting in his armchair, reading the business section of the newspaper. He barely acknowledged my arrival, giving me only a slight nod instead of a greeting. Natalie came down the stairs, looking like she was ready for the cover of a medical lifestyle magazine. Her husband, Matthew, had just unbuckled the twins from their booster seats and whispered, "Let's not let the kids mess with Aunt Ruby's weird laptop again." Nobody wants their kid coding by age 3. I didn't react. I just gave a faint smile. As I had learned to do over the years, dinner started at exactly this, 00 p.m. As usual, my mother raised a toast to health and family unity. And, as expected, my father stood next to deliver a 3-minute speech on Natalie's contributions to the medical field. How lucky we were to have Matthew, the ideal son-in-law who valued knowledge, and how proud we were to watch their grandchildren exceed developmental benchmarks. Not a single word about me. As everyone began carving into the turkey, I gently placed the stack of documents on the table, right in front of my parents. "I'd like to share something today," I said. My mother paused, frowning, as if I had spilled gravy on the tablecloth. Natalie glanced at the papers, her lips pressed together with suspicion. I pulled one sheet from the stack and laid it open on the table. It was a copy of TechBridge Weekly's Centerfold, featuring a rare photo of me smiling. The headline was bold: "Ruby Lawson, founder and CEO of CraftLogic Solutions, the software platform reshaping America's artisan market." My father picked up the magazine, flipping through it as if searching for signs of forgery. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his tone colder than the wind outside. "From my own life," I replied. "I've been running CraftLogic for 8 years now. The company employs over 180 people across 3 cities. It's currently valued at $47 million. And, Mom, Dad, I'm the one behind every bit of support this family has received over the past 4 years." I opened the folder and showed them the bank transfer records from Spring Hill Holding to their mortgage lender, health insurance documents for my mother funded by a private trust, a fake contract from Brightstone Consulting issuing my dad a monthly salary, and scholarship award letters granted to Jacob and Lily, all with proof. The room froze. My father pushed back his chair and stood abruptly. His face flushed. "You're making this up. A college dropout with no credentials suddenly becomes a software millionaire. Lie to the world, but don't insult our intelligence. You're the one lying to yourself." I stayed quiet because I thought the family needed to keep its pride, but I was tired. Tired of hiding everything just to be tolerated in that house. My mother whispered, as if afraid of her own voice, "Why didn't you tell us sooner?" I looked at her, answering slowly. "Because every time I spoke, you looked at me like I was an outsider, like I didn't belong." So I chose to help without asking for acknowledgement. Natalie leaned forward on her elbows, coldly interjecting, "I've worked 14-hour days to become a doctor. And you write code at home and suddenly you're a celebrated CEO. That's laughable." I didn't deny her hard work, but I also didn't back down. "I don't deny your struggles. But you're not the only one who struggled." I've fallen asleep on my keyboard, eaten dry ramen because I couldn't afford to boil water. I built this from nothing. My father slammed his hand on the table, his voice trembling with anger. "Enough." I don't want to hear another word. "You're a fraud, a disgrace to this family. Someone like you could only make money through deceit." I stood up. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. "So that's it. You don't want to know who I really am. You just want the ideal version of me that you made up. Fine." I gathered the documents, placing them carefully back in my bag as I turned toward the door. My mother gently grabbed my wrist, her voice barely above a whisper. "Ruby, what about next month's support?" I looked at her, my voice barely a breath. "Mom, people who see me as a disgrace can't keep living off my money. As of today, it ends." I stepped out of the house where I had always been seen as nothing more than a burden. It was still raining, but every drop that fell on my shoulders felt impossibly light. I left Salem the very next morning. No letters, no messages. My flight to Florida departed at 6. Hi. From PDXM, I sat by the window, watching the thin clouds dissolve over the Oregon sky, the place I once thought I belonged to. Not anymore. 3 years ago, I had bought a vacation home on the outskirts of Clearwater, just off the Tampa coast. It was a 3-bedroom house with a red tile roof, white paint, and a backyard full of grapefruit trees and lavender. Until then, I had only visited it on rare occasions when I needed to escape the whirlwind of work. But this time, I wasn't there to take a break. I came to start over. During the first week, I cleared out the entire vacation rental interior cheap printed aria, clunky faux antique furniture, and lifeless decor. I hired a local interior architect, Elena, to transform the house into a real home, bright, clean, modern, and grounded, a place where I could breathe and just be. Meanwhile, I authorized Robert Matarati to send official notices to each relevant party, terminating all previously arranged financial supports. The Spring Hill Fund ceased all mortgage payments on the house in Salem. Brightstone terminated its consulting contract with Mr. Douglas Lawson. The special scholarships for Natalie's children would not be renewed next year. No explanations. None needed. I didn't owe them anything anymore. 2 weeks later, I stepped into CraftLogic's new headquarters in the West Bay District Business Complex. Right in the heart of Clearwater, The office was on the 9th floor of a glass building overlooking the ocean, flooded with natural light across dark walnut floors. There, I reunited with 3 key team members from Portland: Jared, Rachel, and Dominic, who had volunteered to relocate and help launch the new office. We're resetting everything. Right, Rachel asked during our first meeting. That's right, I said, with a smile. No more anonymity, no more double life. This is the freest chapter for the company and for me. Craft Logic didn't just survive this transition, it thrived. We secured 3 new Florida-based clients in the first quarter, and an investment fund out of Boston had just proposed a new valuation of $59, $7 million, without even including the AI products we were preparing to release. I no longer wore cheap jeans just to stay humble. I no longer hid my expensive smartwatch under long sleeves. I didn't have to pretend to fail just to be temporarily forgiven for being different. I was the CEO, the founder. I was Ruby Lawson in every sense. I started becoming active in the local business community. One Friday evening, at a Florida Women in Tech networking event, I met Caleb Meyer, a digital transformation consultant for nonprofit organizations. He had a warm smile and the kind of natural handshake that felt like you'd known him forever. We talked about using tech to connect young founders in rural areas, and then about Steam Grouper from a nearby Thai place. 3 weeks later, we had dinner for the 3rd time. This time, there was no more work talk. We walked barefoot on the beach at night, sharing a pair of earbuds and playing our favorite teenage songs. I didn't have to explain what my company did. I didn't have to dodge financial questions. You're the only person I know who built an entire company and managed to keep it secret from the world, Caleb said, as we sat on the porch, listening to the soft waves. I laughed, maybe because I used to think if they knew, they'd try to turn me into someone else. And now, if someone can't accept who I really am, they don't get to be part of my life. We clinked our mint pineapple cocktails together, softly, like an unspoken promise without strings attached. I still remember that last dinner at my parents' house, the biting remarks, the dismissive glances, but instead of letting those things eat away at me, I now use them to measure myself. Every day I live honestly is a day I've already won. I started thinking more about people like me, young individuals without fancy degrees but filled with big ideas. Not everyone can spend years grinding in the dark the way I did. And not everyone gets the chance to meet someone like Marcia Bennett at exactly the right moment. So, I decided to start the Ruby Foundation, with its first program called the Forge Forward Grant, a financial aid and mentorship fund for young founders without college degrees but with promising business plans. We didn't ask where they studied. We only cared about what they wanted to build and why. The fund's announcement took place in a small auditorium at the Clearwater Tech Hub under the warm April sun. With the scent of fresh roasted coffee in the air, I stepped onto the stage. No papers, no teleprompter, just me. Here are people who can craft the perfect wooden chair at 16, others who develop content filtering algorithms without taking a single hour of computer science. If we deny them a chance just because they don't have the right diploma, then we're the ones lacking. We received nearly 500 applications in just the first 6 weeks. Alicia Monroe, 22 years old and living in El Paso, Texas, was the first to receive a $20,000 grant to develop a scheduling platform for local clinics. She cried during our first video call. I didn't think anyone would pick me when the education section only said high school, she said, her voice trembling. I smiled and gently said, maybe you just hadn't met the right reviewer yet. Forge Forward wasn't just a fun. It was a heartfelt response to the 19-year-old version of me, the one who once curled up in a 450-square-foot apartment, wishing someone would just believe in her. One afternoon in June, while I was watering the lavender in the yard, my phone rang. The screen said, call from landline, Salim, or I almost let it go to voicemail, like I had many times before. But something in my gut told me to answer. A soft voice came through, carefully choosing each word. It's Mom, Linda. I didn't respond right away. She took a deep breath and continued. Your father and I are planning to come to Florida next month. We were wondering if we could see you. A question, light as the breeze, yet each word pressed heavy against my chest. 2 years ago, I was called a disgrace. And now, they wanted to meet, not to borrow money, not for medical reasons, just to meet. I asked calmly, in what capacity do you want to see me? As my daughter? She said, just my daughter, if you'll allow it. I didn't give an answer that day. I needed time, not to forgive, but to ask myself whether there was anything left that I even needed from that meeting. 3 weeks later, I chose a small coffee shop by the shore in Clearwater, where the ocean breeze rustled the palm trees like a soft soundtrack. I arrived early, chose an outdoor table, ordered a cold brew, and waited. At exactly 9, my parents arrived. Douglas walked more slowly than I remembered, his hair nearly all white. Mom wore a beige floral dress, her face softer than it used to be. They sat down. Silence lingered for nearly a minute. I didn't feel nervous. My heart didn't tighten like it once had. I just sat there, steady, like the still water of the bay before me.